So we're very pleased tonight to have Cathy Bryarly, as both a search and rescue volunteer and former sheriff's deputy with Boulder County. Cathy has been involved with many different cases. Join her for a discussion that will include learning about the history of Boulder County search and rescue team and how Cathy's dogs aided in finding those who went missing. Along with discussing search and rescue, Cathy's going to talk about her experience when a search became not just for missing persons, but also for criminals. We were hoping you'd bring your current K9. Dan is certified to find human remains, and he has helped with several different criminal cases. Cathy will explain how the dogs often showed the truth or hinted at the truth that made a difference in the case. So Cathy is a retired sheriff's deputy. She was an original member of Search and Rescue Dogs of the United States when it began in 1993. She was a volunteer dog handler with Front Range Rescue Dogs in Boulder from 1987 to 97, and had a certified area search and avalanche dog in Oregon from 91 to 97. Cathy was a K9 Bloodhound handler for the Boulder County Sheriff's Office from 2004 to 2017. The first dog, Sally, was certified in trailing, and her second dog, Jason, was certified in trailing and human remains detection. Her current dog, Sam, is certified in human remains detection. Sally, Jason, and Sam have all had successful searches in each of their various disciplines. Cathy enjoys coaching dog teams and evaluating them for certification. She and her husband, Rob, live on a 1-acre ranch east of Longmont. They have 4 horses, 5 cats, 2 dogs, and 2 ducks. Besides training dogs, Cathy enjoys photography and advocating for wild horses, building and furnishing dollhouses, and of course, reading mysteries. So welcome, Cathy Bryarly.
I'm going to move my picture of Sam over here. Very good.
Hi. Well, I am very honored to be here. I have to tell you, I've been a mystery reader almost my entire life, beginning with my brother's Party Boys Mysteries. I didn't find books worth reading unless they were mysteries, or occasionally they were written about dogs or horses. But mostly I've been a mystery fan my entire life. So, and right now I am reading, I think, Craig Johnson's 4th or 5th, I've kind of lost track, either 4th or 5th Longmire. I watched so I watched, I watched the show, and then now I have to read the book. So. Okay, so, yeah, I want to talk about search and rescue, obviously, that's why I'm here. But I want to start out talking about kind of the history of search and rescue in Boulder County, because I think it's kind of interesting. So, back in 1947, there was a little girl who went missing up in what's now the Sugarloaf subdivision. It's up Boulder Canyon and it's west of Boulder. She told her daddy that she was going to run home and get something. He was a minor, he was at his mommy. And so she ran home to get something and was never seen or heard from again. So as I said, that was 1947. And so that was when Rocky Mountain Rescue Group was formed, because the neighbors and the community members felt like they just really didn't do a very good job of looking for her. They might have been able to find her successfully if they would have been more organized about it. There's actually still, there's a road up in the Sugarloaf subdivision. It's called the Lost Angel Road. So every time I go up there, I'm sad. So Rocky Mountain Rescue Group was the first search and rescue group in Colorado, and they were one of the first in the entire country. And if you ever, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Cliffhanger. Cliffhanger with Sylvester Stallone and John Lithgow. So that was a little, I guess the Recommend Rescue people watch that every year. That's their little thing, that they were, it wasn't like that. I mean, Recommend Rescue is not like that. There's nobody that looks like Sylvester Stallone. Most of them are computer geeks. They're all in really good shape, so. Okay, so moving along, then, Front Range Rescue Dogs was formed in 1984, and I became a member of that in 1987. They were sort of an offshoot of Rocky Mountain Rescue, like Rocky Mountain Rescue with dogs, but it was also a breakoff group from Search and Rescue Dogs of Colorado, which I'm not sure when they started, but they were the first search and rescue dogs in Colorado. So probably not that long before, probably late 70s, early 80s when they started. And okay, so my first dog, Morgan, when we were members of Front Range Rescue Dogs, she was certified in area search and avalanche search, and she basically failed out of disaster search, which I'll talk about later, but she was, I thought, a pretty good wilderness search dog. So now I want to kind of interject that on the national scene, FEMA came around, Federal Emergency Management Agency. They came around in 1979, but they didn't really get that organized until about 1988 when their, whatever law was enacted that formed them was amended. So in 1988, dogs kind of got involved at the same time as when that was amended. And then their laws that govern them have actually been amended several times since then, usually after a major hurricane, because they learned things that they did wrong, and they try to fix that. So FEMA basically created the NIM system, which there's, the federal government has a lot of those acronyms, right? So NIM stands for National Incident Management System. So the reason I want to bring them up is because they now actually govern everything. So they govern search and rescue dogs, they govern fire trucks, they govern any kind of resource that you might have response in emergency. They have it classified in what's called a typing system. So that way, everybody knows, what can your dog do? So I can say, well, my dog's certified in blah, 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 and we type 3. So that way, when there's a big something that happens, then everybody will know, everybody's on the same page as far as who can do what. As far as search in the state of Colorado, though, the local sheriff is the one who basically is in charge of searches. So statutorily, the local sheriff is the one who's in charge, unless it goes to the federal level. And then, like I said, it would be FEMA. So I joined the group that I'm in now, Search and Rescue Dogs of the United States. It started in 1991. It started in a time when there was a big uproar in the search and rescue dog world because there were people who had embezzled funds, and imagine that. And there was all this political infighting that was going on in the search and rescue dog group. So actually, the woman who started Front Range Rescue Dogs in 1984, her name's Ann Wickman. She is now retired, but she used to be a ranger with Boulder Mountain Park. She got together with some other people across the country and said, let's start our own national group and let's make it better than the two national groups that are all fighting with each other. So that was 1991, and then I actually joined in 1993, which was the first year that they allowed members. They basically started having members 2 years later. So, let's see where I'm at here. And actually, let me talk about the woman who started SARDUS with the other people. So she had a black lab at the time. She trained it through FEMA to go to disasters. Actually went to the World Trade Center with both her dog and the uncle, that dog's nephew. Kind of confusing. And that dog is actually my dog Sam's great-grandfather. Mm-hmm. So his name is Jenner. So they went to the World Trade Center, and although the other dog, the nephew dog, Merlin, actually, he was one of the few dogs that actually found live people at the World Trade Center. Mm-hmm. So that was pretty neat. But Anne always said that her dog was actually more of a therapy dog. They would go out and search. They'd do their shift, their day shift search. But when they got done, wherever they were stationed, the firefighters and all the rescue crews would come by, and so Jenna was actually more of a therapy dog, really than a search dog at the World Trade Center. So I thought that was okay. So back to my personal history. So my first dog, Morgan, was certified, as I said, in air scent or area search. People kind of call it both things, and avalanche. As I said, she saw a lot of disasters. She wasn't brave enough. Loud noises bothered her, so that didn't work out for her. But she was pretty good at area search. So when we train a dog to look for somebody, the first thing we would do is we would have the person that they were supposed to look for, we would have them run away. And that would get the dog excited and wanting to go find the person. And so that's how we started them. And that's actually how we start both the area search dogs and the trailing dogs. Is you have somebody, you might even start out like with a puppy, you might even have like another person would hold your puppy for you, and then you would be the person that would run away, because obviously the puppy wants to find mommy or daddy. So we do that, and then gradually you would, as I said, you go to a person that they didn't know. Then you make it harder, where there would be a time lapse between when the person ran away and when you would let the dog go find them. It works very well for trailing because they have to put their nose down and follow where the person ran. So back with area search and air scent, basically if you go to a search and you have an area search dog, you're assigned a large area, and the wind blowing or just the topography is what carries the scent to the dog. And then the dog also doesn't stay right with you. It learns to go out and actually hunt. So instead of hunting the animal, the dog is hunting the person. People train the dog sometimes to only find the person that you give the scent to, or only the person that you have the scent for, you give that to the dog, and that's the only person they find. Or sometimes they're just trained to just find anybody that's out there in that search area. So like for a test, we do about 120 acres in 2 hours. So, if that's flat, it's not so bad. But up in the mountains, it can be kind of challenging. I know it's challenging for me to try to keep up with the person who's testing and the dog who's testing, because I'm trying to evaluate. So that just ensures that we know that it doesn't take too long for the person and dog team searching, the area, to make sure that they can do it in a timely manner. Because obviously, if someone's out there lost, if it's an emergency, you want to find them as soon as possible. So, in speaking of avalanche, it's very similar. When a person is buried in an avalanche, they usually only have about an average of 30 minutes before they're dead. So obviously you want to be as quick as possible. That's why the ski areas actually have avalanche dogs on scene, and they're able to get there quickly and try to find them. Usually, unfortunately, people are killed by avalanches by just the mechanics of the avalanche, because it's like pieces of concrete, you know, that are falling. So normally, you know, they're already dead, unfortunately, from their injuries. But occasionally, if they've learned, I mean, if you go to avalanche training, they actually teach you, like if you get caught in an avalanche, how to try to get out or whatever. So occasionally, people are able to be, you know, they'll be okay, they won't be dead. And if the dog can find within 30 minutes, then they'll be okay. Because they don't, it takes a while before you suffocate. Basically, it's the hypothermia and the injuries that do you in. Okay. That was Morgan. Okay, so my second dog, Sally, I became a deputy in about, it's hard to remember now, 1995 was when I became a deputy, and about 2003, the sheriff came to me and said, you know, we're thinking about getting a bloodhound, would you be interested in handling it? And I was not impressed with bloodhounds at the time. Because they just didn't, especially in Colorado, they just didn't seem to be able to do the job. I think partly it was because it's so dry here. I mean, bloodhounds in the South where it's humid are awesome. You know, I mean, they're just awesome. But it's harder here with the dry climate. But the dogs have a much harder time with the odor, because the odor doesn't stay as long because there's no humidity. So I was kind of apprehensive about it, but I said, okay. The only bloodhound I had ever heard of was Yogi, and I didn't think the Yogi story was quite true, and it turned out it really wasn't quite true. But Yogi supposedly trailed a vehicle that had a little girl's body in it, and it was too hard to believe. So if something's too hard to believe, it probably is. Yogi actually had a lot of help with that whole thing, so that's why he was able to do what he did. So it was more a matter of, we think this is what happened. Can you confirm that? And sure enough, he confirmed it. So, you know, when I've done things with my dog, knowing that, we've always tried to not have the person tell us what the answer is, because it's really easy to convince your dog to do, let's walk this way. So one of her first finds was an escaped work release prisoner who decided that he would rather go home and have a beer than go back to jail. And so he actually stole a bike and rode his bike somewhere. We didn't know where he went. So that worked out well, because the place where he stole the bike, his scent was everywhere. Somebody had seen him steal the bike. And so I was able to tell Sally, we've seen these before. And so she did. And so between, it's always a team effort. It's never like, oh, the dog, you know, woohoo, a miracle or whatever. It's always a team effort. So there were people who had seen the guy go a certain way, and basically we were able to trail him. When we got to a place where my dog had no interest in going any further, we started asking the neighbors, and they were like, oh yeah, that guy went in that trailer over there. So that was easy. That was our first urban find. So when this was about the middle of her career, Estes Park Police called and said, so last night, two boys slashed all the tires on all of the buses, all the school buses, because they didn't want to go to school tomorrow. This is high school. So, and the detective said, this has been on CNN this morning, so we need to solve this. So they had a little intel from a student who had gone and squealed on these guys to the school resource officer. So they said, we think we know who did it, but we have absolutely no evidence. We can't get a search warrant just on somebody saying, we think this guy did it. So they said, could you please come and try? And they didn't have, their K9 unit didn't have any other dogs available. They don't have a bloodhound. So I said, sure. It's been, at that point, I think it's been 18 hours. And I was like, I don't know about this. But it was actually in snow. So they showed me where the kids had climbed a fence and dropped down in the snow. And they hadn't let anybody anywhere near. So that was good. So I took my dog over and, showed her the footprints, because we practiced that. We practiced starting from footprints, and told her to go find. And so she took off. And as soon as, you could see the tracks in the snow, but of course they only lasted about, maybe 30 yards, and that was it. And then it all went to the road where the snow was all melted. So, and they said they had followed the tracks, but they hadn't gotten close to them. They stayed a distance, and watched. So I'm like, okay, we might be able to do this. So I told them, don't give me any clue at all as to if we're correct or if this is, even the right direction or whatever. And they said, stay behind me, like a long way behind me. So I started out, and Sally was going great guns, and I turned around and looked, and they were about 100 yards behind me. And I was like, hey, you guys, you need to be a little closer. So come on up here. So we got to a point where there was an intersection, and we'd gone kind of probably, half a mile through a neighborhood. And there was an intersection. And so I was like, get up here. So I said, do you want me to continue? Because I had no idea if my dog was right. And they said, oh yeah, we want you to continue. So I'm like, okay. So we crossed the big intersection and into another subdivision area. And the wind was blowing really hard. And so my dog started jumping on a privacy fence. And I was like, I think we have the, I think she has the right fence, because she wouldn't be jumping on the privacy fence. So I looked to where, it was downwind and there was a cul-de-sac. So she took me to the cul-de-sac and went to a house that was really, the front yard was really pretty nasty. There was garbage all over the place and the dumpster there. And then she went to the house to the right of it, and then she went to the house to the left of it, and then she came back and was kind of staying on the cul-de-sac. And I told him, I said, I don't think I can tell you for sure which house it is. I really don't. And right then, a guy came out of the house that she had gone to first, and he started screaming at me, exclusively the Mickey Mouse Police Department. And I said, this is the house. And they're like, okay. So they loaded stuff in the car and left, and I'm like, was she right? And they're like, oh yeah, she's right. Well, that was good. That made them very happy to catch those kids. So they did end up doing a search warrant. They found the knife that the kids, stabbed them. And there were two kids involved, so then that kid gave the other kid up, and so it was, crime solved, found the knife. Wow. Okay, and then, so the last live find that Sally had was very interesting. It was a woman who had left her home the day before, and she was elderly. She called her husband basically the next morning, and she said, I'm lost, and I don't know where I am.
Mm-hmm.
So they pinged her phone. Oh, and she's also drunk. That had something to do with it too. So they pinged her phone, and it came back as a place in Netherlands. So Netherlands is west of Boulder, and they sent officers up to where the phone ping was, and they couldn't find anything. So they're like, we're at a loss of what to do. So I said, okay. So we started from the woman's house in Boulder. Sally was unsuccessful. She couldn't find a trail away from the house, which isn't that unlikely. It's when a person lives in a place, their odor, their scent is all over around their house. So, and I had not, at that time, I had not practiced with my dog to do situations like that, because actually people had told me, oh, you'll never be able to get a trail away from somebody's house when they're missing. And I believed them, which was, I shouldn't have done that, because dogs can do amazing things. I should have, if I just would have trained her to do it, she probably would have been able to do it. But I didn't. So we couldn't get a trail away from her house. And so then the next thing was, well, they saw her at Liquor Mart. So, okay, so we go over to Liquor Mart, and sure enough, Sally she circled around the Liquor Mart, and she went 2 blocks directly to the bus station. So it was like, okay, well, now we're getting somewhere, because if her phone pinged in Netherlands, she probably rode the bus up to Netherlands, even though her husband said, oh, she never rides the bus. But, that doesn't matter. People say that all the time. Oh, she never goes anywhere. But he said she never rides the bus. So they started questioning between the time that she went missing and then the time that she probably would have headed up there. They started questioning all the bus drivers. Meanwhile, Sally and I went up to Netherlands and just kind of drove around thinking, well, where would she be? They actually put some area search dogs out in certain places, thinking that maybe they would just run across her. And so they finally, this is hours later. We started this at 9 o'clock in the morning. This was in the afternoon, probably 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They finally found a bus driver who he said, oh, I remember that woman, because she was drunk and she was elderly. He thought it was kind of odd. And so he remembered dropping her off at the parking right in Netherlands. And so I still have her slipper from these 2 other attempts. And so I gave Sally the slipper, and she dragged me across the street. And behind the church, there were some steps, and this woman had fallen down the steps. And I was in total shock when we found her, and she was like, oh, thank you for finding me. I've been laying here for, And so it was so cool. And the first thing that happened was the Netherlands police officer ran up to me. He's like, we searched that whole field over there. We just never came over here. So here she was right there, but they just never looked there. So that was a happy ending.
Wow.
Another time that the person was just right there. Well, there's several times, because that's a good place to find a lost person or criminal, is the last place you've seen them. It's they're right there. So, they are literally right there. So this guy had, he had jumped out of his wife was taking him to the hospital for mental health. And he had jumped out of the car and basically fallen down the embankment in Boulder Canyon. And when I got there, I said, well, has anybody really looked for it? And they're like, no. It's like, okay. So, it was pretty easy. I just gave Sally his hat that his wife had given him. And she was like, oh, and she dove off the side, and I'm trying to answer. And
sure enough, there he was down there. I mean,
he was right there. But, I mean, this had been like 2 hours that they were kind of standing around going, we're not sure what to do. But maybe you should look where he was last seen. So we had a lot of things like that. Okay, so fast forward a little bit. So as it says, tells the story of Sally's last live find. So her last actual find was unfortunately a suicide. But again, it was a case where the car was there in the parking lot, and I'm not sure that the deputies understood that it was a possible suicide, because they were like, yeah, her car's here, but we don't see her anywhere. So the next day, she still hadn't come home. So they said, hey, could you try a trail from the car? So we did practice that quite a bit. And so Sally was able to find her. She wasn't that far away. It was actually at sort of a trailhead, sort of like an informal trailhead, not like a regular trailhead where you go, but sort of off to the side trailhead. So I already had Sally's replacement. His name is Jason, and he was about 4 months old at the time. And so Jason got to actually find this person. Well, he thought he was finding her. So it was a wonderful way to get him started. I mean, he had already been started training, but for him to actually find somebody when he was that young, I think it really helped him a lot mentally. And to find a body, and some dogs are very upset when they find bodies, and I think to be able to be all excited with him, like, oh, look what you just did, and it really helped him, mentally to be like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. So that was Jason's first unofficial find, because Sally already found this person. Jason was an interesting dog. I think we attended the regular K9 training at times. So he seemed to pick up on watching those fight dogs, because my husband was his target quite a bit, unfortunately. So when I worked with Jason, I never worried about if it was truly a bad person that he was looking for. I never worried about my safety, because I always knew that he would protect me, even though he wasn't supposed to. But one of his coolest finds was there was, again, phone ping, which phone pings just don't work sometimes. They just simply don't. So we were up on Flagstaff Mountain, and there was a suicidal person's car that was found, and her phone was pinging about 2 miles away. Mm-hmm. And so they wanted us to come and look for her, obviously. So normally I tell people, because my dog usually could, if I had a scent article, the dog would usually follow the correct scent. So if people were all over the place, it usually didn't matter too much. But I knew that we didn't have a scent article. There was a car that was locked, and that was it. So I asked the rangers to please not mess around very much, and don't be out walking around looking for, because I was actually pretty close, and I'd be there in a timely manner. And so I didn't feel like I was endangering this person's life by saying, wait. Like I said, I didn't usually do that, but this time I just felt like I should. So I got there, and there was nobody who could open the door. The deputies didn't carry a Slim Jim or whatever. They just did it because people would say, I left my keys in the car, and the deputy would Slim Jim the car and damage the car, and then they would be in trouble, and people would want to sue the sheriff's office for damaging their car. So we're like, we're not going to do that anymore. So the only way to get into a vehicle then was calling a tow truck. So the tow tow truck was on the way, but it wasn't there yet. And, I had taught Jason, not only to like, it's funny because when you have your second dog, you think of all the mistakes you made with your first dog. So not only did Jason know how to find somebody by, circling their house and then figuring out which way they went, but I also taught him to sniff the crack in the door so that he could look for that person without having to get into the car. Because of things like this happening, where it's going to be a time delay before you can actually get into the car. So I had him sniff the car, and I told him to go find, and he circled the car once, and he started jumping on the car. And I was like, well, that's really weird. I mean, sometimes he would do that if I would train with him leaving from a person's vehicle that he knew really well, and he was all excited to find him or whatever. He might jump on the door maybe once, but he repeatedly jumps on his car. And I was like, that's really weird. So I kind of looked in the car. It had a hatch, and there was a blanket in the back on the floor, the hatch. And I was like, okay, a person could be laying under there. And so I jiggled the car, and you could see the woman's body moving, jiggling in the car. So I was like, come and break into this car. So we broke into the car. She was unconscious. We got her out, laid her on her back, and sure enough, she then vomited because she's lying on her back and all that gross stuff in her stomach. And then we rolled her over. By the time the ambulance got there, we're like, she actually might live. She never regained consciousness with us, but she did in the hospital, and she lived. So I don't know what happened after that, but at least she lived for that day. So
Jason's alive too.
yeah.
Wow.
So that's one of my favorites of his finds, definitely. So later that year, we had a call where I actually got paged at 1 o'clock in the morning. Well, the entire K9 unit got paged. And the story was that Boulder Police Department had lost somebody. Well, they weren't sure if he was a bad guy or if he was more like a victim. So they were actually afraid that he had shot at them because they had tried to apprehend him. He was in a trailer parked just on the road. They tried to apprehend him, and so they heard a shot, and they didn't know if he was shooting at them or if he shot himself. So they set up a perimeter, and I've been on a perimeter before and let people get away, so, no fault to them, but when they went to go into the trailer, he was gone. So, but there was a lot of blood in the trailer, so it's pretty obvious that he most likely had shot himself and not at them. But they couldn't find a gun, so they were like, we have to find this guy. So this was 1 o'clock in the morning, and Jason and I had already looked for, I can't remember, some sort of a missing person that evening. So I got the page, and I'm like, yeah, well, the K9 can handle this. The dogs with teeth. So at 4 o'clock in the morning, I got a page, and it said, no, you need to come do this because we're not finding this guy, and we need to find this guy. So what they've been doing was they've been sending the K9 in to backyards, like so the SWAT team was tracking his blood, but they were sending the white dog into the backyard to search the yard, and then he's not there. So then they have to look for more blood. So they had been chasing this guy all night through this neighborhood, but not finding him for 3 hours. So we got there, and the SWAT team was very helpful. They're like, okay, here's the blood. And so between the SWAT team and Jason, we continued to follow this guy. We got to one backyard where Jason, first passed the SWAT team. I was supposed to be behind the SWAT team, two guys in the SWAT team. And Jason like just about knocked one guy over because he was so excited to go into this backyard, and I'm like, oh, he might be back here. Well, it turned out that, because we went through the yard, and then Jason just kept blasting through. So we found a gate, and he blasted through the gate, and I heard the guys yelling, and they said there was a tree house in the yard, and they're like, there's blood all over this tree house. So he was up in the tree house, probably watching us the whole time. So we felt pretty lucky. So we continued on, and again, between looking for blood spatter and Jason's nose, we got to a point where we didn't know what else to do. We did find, he took us to a bike path. We did find kind of a big puddle of blood, so he probably stood there and watched as we were trying to find him. So it got light. We got to a point where it was like the end of the bike path. There was like a 5-way intersection between the bike path and the road. This is in like a neighborhood in Boulder. And I said, I don't know what else to do because, you know, we looked everywhere and like, and my dog, Jason, was acting like the guy was right there somewhere, but he just couldn't find him. So finally, one of the SWAT team members said, well, did you see there was like a few drops of blood over there? And I was like, no, we never went over to that particular spot. So I was like, don't let anybody get on the blood. So, you know, I go walking over there. It's probably, I don't know, probably 40 yards away from where we ended. And the whole SWAT team is like surrounding the something or whatever. They're all standing there in a circle. We get over there and they part. And there's like, I don't know, probably 10 drops of blood on the concrete. So I showed it to Jason, and it was like a little light bulb went on in his head. And he's like, oh, I know where he is. So he dragged me up this embankment, and there wasn't even any SWAT team members with me. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, the guy's right there. And he looked like he had on a Halloween mask because he had shot himself in the head, not died, and the whole side of his face was just covered with blood. So I started yelling, you know, let me see your hand, let me see your hand. And because he had his gun just in his waistband there. And he was so frightened by Jason. Jason's face was like this close. So when I said, let me see your hands, he put his hands up in front of his face, like covering his face. Like, cool, that worked. So me hollering at him, then the whole SWAT team was like, okay, you know. So, and I just told Jason out of the way, I was like, I don't want him to get shot and people start shooting, you know. So that was probably his most exciting find. Because usually, you know, we usually found people who didn't really need to be found. You know, we find the transient that went off and it was never lost or whatever. And I was like, hey, we actually found, you know, this is like the big, you know, kahuna or whatever. It's like, we actually found the person. So that was pretty exciting.
And how long did that take?
So it was probably, I got there at 4, and it was getting light, and it was in August. So probably 2 hours, it's probably about 6, maybe 5:30, maybe an hour and a half.
And we didn't go that far.
It was just twisting and turning and losing it, and then the SWAT team would find some drops of blood, and then we go a little further. So, yeah, and it really, I mean, all total, it was probably half a mile. But it just took that long to actually do it.
Do you know if the guy lives?
Yeah, he did.
Wow.
Yep, he actually was able to like get onto the pram by himself, and they took him off in the ambulance. Yeah, so and the amount of blood he lost, I could not believe it.
And you're thinking he might pass out and get shot.
Right.
Or something, you know,
Yeah.
the blood.
Yeah.
And you kept describing the blood.
Yeah. And actually, so I should go back to, I don't know if you guys remember, if you're local, if you remember the Lance Herring search. But he was the guy who basically didn't want to go back to the Army. And so same thing. So supposedly the story was his friend said, oh, he hit his head and he bled here. And so, you know, we went up and like, the amount of blood that was there, it was like, that amount of blood would not make a person, I mean, you would be fine, you know, especially after seeing that, after the huge amount of blood, and he was like walking around, you know, so, yeah, you have to really lose quite a bit of blood before you actually can't go further, or whatever. I think it also depends on how fast it happens. But it probably took him a while to bleed that long, so. And actually, I should go back and talk about the Lance hearing searches really quickly. So, I think people kind of suspected that this guy's friend was lying about what had happened, because supposedly he had gone up in El Dorado Canyon, hit his head, and then when his friend came out to call for help, then he supposedly wandered off. And his friend was very, I mean, I should have known, like if I would have been doing this longer at the time, I would have been like, wait a second, I think this guy's lying. But his friend was very evasive about his answers, because I was trying to, this is back to Sally, I was trying to set Sally on the correct person, like, because the friend had been all over the place, and I didn't want Sally to go look for him. So I wanted to be very sure that we were looking for the right person. And the guy changed his story a couple times about which seat in the car Lance was sitting in. And I'm like, you should know, were you driving or was he driving? You know, it's like, come on. And then I was like, well, you know, we kind of switch back and forth. And so he intentionally was trying to like mess with me. But we felt like we had good scent arguably, because we ended up with Lance's shoe. And so we started to go up the trail. And here's Sally, she's like, she didn't want to go up the trail. She tried to drag me down the road. And I was like, well, come on! And, you know, I really thought, like, afterwards, it was clear that, I mean, the reason she wanted to drag me down the road was because that was the last place he went. So, yeah, he went up there, but he also came down and went down the road, got back in the car and drove away. So, you know, it's things like that where, like, if you pay attention, it's like, the dog's like, no, you're wrong. You know, just dogs don't lie. They just don't. So anyway, so that's the Lance hearing story. But moving on. Okay, so the end of Jason. So Jason's last find was a human remains find. And it was really cool because 4 of us went out to this big area out east. It was in Kit Carson County. And so there were 4 dogs, and there was, we thought it was a suicide, so we were being a little too casual about it. Turned out it was a homicide victim, which we didn't find out until we were done, but his remains had been scattered by animals, by flood and animals, and so it was really cool because all 4 dogs that went, each of the dogs found part of him. And we found almost all of him. So there was only about half of him missing. But there was like shoulder missing, the spine was missing, one side of the pelvis, right? The mandible. And they really wanted to find the mandible because they wanted to know if the suspect had punched him in the mouth. For some reason that was important. So they did find the mandible, and it was all in one piece, so whatever. But it was so much, I mean, it was such a cool thing to me because I'd never done anything that was like truly forensic before. And so that's what got me into wanting to do the human remains with my dog's family. Sam, I can't really talk about everything Sam's done, but the first thing he found was, I don't know if you heard about the little boy that was in concrete. Mm-hmm. Okay. So this boy was missing since the spring. This was December now. Missing since the spring, and they just got very suspicious of the parents. Finally, the mother admitted something to somebody in prison. I think she's in prison for heroin or something. And I'm trying to remember, like, I don't want to say too much, but I read the search warrant, so I know what to say. So they found the detectives were really good. They found the storage unit that they had rented around the same time little boy went missing. So it turned out that that was just coincidental, that they had already rented the storage unit, and it was a couple weeks later before the boy went missing. But basically what had happened was they kept him in the dog kennel when he was bound. And this is a sweet little boy, 7, 8 years old. So there was a lot of different drugs involved. I know heroin and methamphetamine for sure. Anyway, they kept him in a dog kennel when he was bound, and he died. It was hot, and so he died. They didn't know what to do, so they hauled him to the storage unit, and they left him in the dog crate. They filled the dog crate with concrete. So we ended up, this was in December, it was like a couple days before Christmas. It was very sad. And so Sam and another dog, they opened the storage unit. It was about, I think, maybe 5 degrees when we first got there. So, and we're like, we weren't sure if the cold was going to affect anything or not. It turned out it probably did. So the dogs initially didn't alert. So, and I probably should say this too, when we do, especially like if Kathleen, showing her dogs who look for narcotics, so our dogs have to give a trained final response, and it has to be very obvious, because if we're doing any kind of forensic work, you can't just say, yeah, my dog raised his left eyebrow, and I'm pretty sure that there's some blood residue here. Yeah, we can't do that. It's got to be very obvious. So neither one of the dogs gave the trained final response. But I noticed, and we didn't watch each other. And I actually went first because Sam doesn't bark. The other dog would bark. So we didn't want to be influenced with what the other dog did. So neither dog gave a trained final response, but Sam actually ran around behind. And I thought, oh, well, he didn't find anything, so he's just looking or whatever. But then afterwards, I thought, there probably was some odor there, but he couldn't figure out exactly where it was coming from. And so when he came out, he was like trying to run around behind it, trying to figure out where that odor was coming from. Because this kid had been there all summer. Mm-hmm. So, there had to be some kind of odor in there. But what they had done was they had wrapped the concrete with heavy black plastic. There was like 8 layers of this heavy black plastic on it. So because it was so cold, later a bomb K9 handler explained this to me. He said, this is all science, and it's called vapor barrier, and there has to be a certain temperature before the odor is going to come out. So it's the same thing if you think about stuff in your refrigerator. It might not be too bad when it's in the refrigerator, or especially if it's in the freezer, but when you pull it out, you're like, whoa, that's really rotten. So it's the same kind of thing between the low temperature and all the layers of plastic. That's why the dogs couldn't figure it out. So we were sent on our way because they really had not thought they were going to. They told us that morning, we're not going to find a body. We just want you to look, make sure that there's no blood-stained rags or something in the storage unit. So we were actually leaving, and they came and got us, and they said, hey, could you come back? Because we took a bunch of plastic off of that object, and we smell something. So we're like, okay. So, I tried really hard not to influence Sam at all, because it's like, well, people, it's probably not someone's German Shepherd in there. It's probably a body. So I just tried really hard not to even look at him, So sure enough, and he ran in there, boom, laid down. He's like, yeah, this is it, Mom. So the other dog did the same thing. So they ended up getting another search warrant, and it actually was a little bit before they could figure out that he was actually in there. They actually x-rayed the whole thing, and they couldn't tell that there was anybody, so I guess they actually like chipped away until they found his remains, so. And that was, I mean, that's probably the saddest call that I ever went on. So, yeah, so that was pretty sad. So a couple of other things, because I don't want to end on that note. A couple of other things that Sam has done is, there was a drowning in Cherry Creek, last year, and they didn't find him after like 9 days, I think it was. And so, they didn't even consider dogs, but one ranger was talking to another ranger, and this other ranger was like, well, I know these people who have human remains detection dogs. So we went down there and used a boat and, you know, did like a grid pattern. And between the two dogs, between what Sam did and what the other dog did, we told them, you know, look here or whatever. And we were never told that we were right. But the next morning, so we left at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The next morning at 11 o'clock, they're like, oh, Kevin. So we're guessing that if they looked for 9 days and couldn't find them, and then we were there and then they found them, you know, the next day. But we probably have something to do with that.
So the dog can smell in the water?
Yes, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and what happens is, it's kind of the same as with an avalanche with snow, the odor comes up, you know, through whatever. But in the water, it's actually difficult because of all of the movement of the water. So it's both the movement of the water and the wind blowing that makes it hard for the dog to pinpoint exactly where the odor is. Yeah. Okay, let's see.
I have a question. This is Chris Goff talking from the Zoom. What can anybody become a trainer of a search and rescue dog, and what breed? What are the characteristics of the dog that are necessary? You said one dog didn't work out because she was afraid of loud noises, but are there certain characteristics that they look for, or could any breed of dog become a search and rescue dog?
Pretty much any breed can, if it's large enough. And
so how big does it have?
Well, that's a very good question. So I know a lady in California who has used beagles for like 25 years instead of bloodhounds. And she's been very successful. That's probably the smallest dog that I've heard of being really successful. I have heard people train like a dog as small as a Jack Russell Terrier to do human remains detection. Terriers are very good at odor. The problem is that terriers are meant to look for rats and mice and things like that, and so it's not so much that they can't do the work, it's that they get distracted by other things. I know a woman who has Dobermans. She uses Dobermans for human remains detection and is very successful. Mostly, so we look for dogs that are already working dogs so that they're dedicated to us and wanting to do what we want them to do. I'm not talking about bloodhounds because they do their own thing. But the German Shepherds, the Belgian Malinois, the Dutch Shepherds, so the Shepherd type dogs, and then also the Retriever type dogs. So Lab, Golden Retrievers, breeds like that. It's something about a strong retrieving instinct. And Shepherds, you don't really think about Shepherds having a strong retrieving instinct because, they were meant to shepherd or whatever, but they actually do. Most Shepherds have a very strong retrieving instinct.
What about the aggressiveness, though? I mean, some of those dogs tend to have an aggressive streak, and if you're searching and rescuing for a small child or something, you definitely don't want a dog that would show aggression in any way.
So,
Do they test them for these things? Do they?
yeah, so we just make sure that, like, I mean, I know a lot of people who use, a lot of volunteers who use, like German Shepherds used to be the big, you know, they used to be the go-to dog to do this. And then it kind of became labs because they're nice, right? What we found is people who are really intent on having like a nice German Shepherd, there are lines of breeders or whatever, that they actually have dogs that are specifically nice, like social and not aggressive. The only recently when I've seen people maybe get in over their head is when they have a Belgian Malinois that's like that Shepherd, it's got really high drive. Sometimes that can be a problem, but it's usually more of a problem actually for the handler than for the person they're looking for. Because if they're not taught to bite the person that they find, it's very rare that a search dog is going to be aggressive to the person they find. It's the handler that they want to be the alpha dog, and the handler's like, no, I'm the alpha dog. So it's either the handler has problems or they end up having problems with each other in the group. So they might have, their dog might get aggressive to other handlers or to other dogs. So that's the main problem. It's not necessarily that the dog's going to be aggressive to the person that they find. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So do they blackball certain dogs that if they don't know and they get a handler out there and then this dog is doing certain things, you're like, okay, this person can never be called out again by the sheriff's department because.
Yeah. And they will, somebody will actually, everybody belongs everyone's a member of some sort of group. People like, 20, 30 years ago, you used to go, hey, I'm the search dog, and you could go, look for a lost person, and you just can't do that anymore. So that person and that dog, the person might be able to continue, but, the sheriff or whoever the governing body is, usually it's within their own group. They're like, no, you're done. Your dog is not allowed
Is there a certification process or something, or is it just simply that you belong to a certain group and they say you're good? Is it definitely like a...
Yeah, and actually I didn't talk about that enough because I got all excited and wanted to tell stories. So back to when I was talking about FEMA typing everybody, so that's the certification process. So you have to, you and your dog have to pass certain tests in order to be certified, in order to do this. And it's not just the test of what you have to do. Like, so with trailing, there's different types. My dogs were called type 3. And so that means that they could pass a test doing a 2-hour-old trail that was a mile long. And, obviously my dogs would do, they would do trails that were days long, but that's not what their certification was. So we could say, okay, my dog can do a 2-hour-old trail that's an hour long, that's, through downtown Boulder or whatever. So the same thing, like with SAM certification with human remains detection, there's actual tests that we have to go through to make sure that they can do it.
So I have one last question and then I won't keep the time. I'll let other people ask, but what happened, how long does it take to have a handler be trained and then train a dog effectively and go through certification? How old is the average dog by the time that they are eligible to work in the field?
Okay. So a dog like a bloodhound, if you start training when it's a puppy, By the time it's about 14 months old, it can be certified, as long as the handler, like, knows what it's doing, knows what they're doing. And usually, like, people that are brand new to search and rescue, it takes, I would say, at least 2 years to really get the skills. It's both handling the dog and then, like, knowing how to search and knowing how to fit into the search. The wilderness search people have a lot more stuff that they have to be able to do, because they have to be able to go up in the wilderness and not become a victim themselves. So that's a big thing. So yeah, I would say probably 2 years at least for the person who doesn't have any experience. Makes sense?
Thank you.
As far as, like, for Sam, I'll just go ahead and segue to Sam. So I got into the puppy. He was from a working line, and he was certified when he was 18 months old. But again, like, he was my fourth dog, and he was from a line of dogs that were working dogs and did this exact thing. So he was 18 months old.
Any other questions?
I have a question. Could you tell me a little bit about the deer? Because I know that you were talking about when you were doing urban tracking, you were attached to the dog.
Right.
How long, like 30-foot lead, a 10-foot lead?
Usually I use a 15-foot lead because if it was an urban area, I felt like that I couldn't control my dog if the lead was longer. Like, he might dash up from the car. Yeah.
Do you use GPS trackers if you're doing this wide area search?
Yes. Yeah, that's become a big thing, electronics. So I have never, like, Sam doesn't have a GPS collar, but most dogs do. We do more like forensic stuff, and so that's why he doesn't have a GPS collar. But if we do a search, I'll GPS myself. So it may not be quite as accurate because he's obviously a little ways away from me, but he's not as far away from me as, like, in a big wilderness area. But yeah, if they do wilderness search, the dog definitely has a GPS on him. Usually the dog and the person both. Yeah.
Now, you said that Jason would protect you. Was Jason a bloodhound?
Yeah.
And he was a protective bloodhound?
Thank you. He didn't was a bloodhound. Yeah. So I swear that he was looking, and he would have to watch the K9s, because one time my husband, we were just in the living room, and Jason was next to me, and he broke a stick over his knee, because he's going to put it in the wood stove, and Jason went over there and latched on and would not let go. And I thought my husband had a broken arm. Wow. So then I went over and, like, cried his mouth off, like, the K9s, and like, so, yeah.
He was an unusual dog.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Any other questions? Quickly, I would think that the smell of dead body would not necessarily match the smell of that person's life. So if you're trailing somebody and then they die, and it's been a few hours or longer and the dog's following the trail, you could still find the body.
Right, yeah. And we've actually talked about trying to do that, like seeing if we could give the dog a scent article and match, the dead thing. Mm-hmm. But we haven't had anybody who would volunteer to do that. Yeah. Oh, you know what? Let me just I know it's like way over, but there is, just because you're all mystery authors, so there's also there's a whole contingent, there's a whole extra thing of people who do human remains detection, who look for like mass graves from 100 years ago, mm-hmm. Or there's a guy who they'll go and try to find like places where Native American boarding schools had.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Yeah, and he'll look for that. And he does it with a combination of the dog and ground penetrating radar. So that's a big thing. And there's like, I mean, there's a group of people that go look for Amelia Earhart every year. So, it's like, it's a thing. So historical and clandestine is definitely it's like a whole separate thing.
Yeah, time for one more question. Do you ever, have you ever had to have your dogs in court? Do they?
Yeah, boy, I could never remember.
Okay.
I'll just briefly say that after we did the little boy in the concrete, that they, the detective's like, well, the defense wants to do a discovery, and so they were like, they emailed me this list of completely ridiculous questions, like, what was the name of your first pet dog? And, you know, I mean, just stupid stuff. I think they probably got it off the internet. So, no, I've never had to go testify with my dog. But I almost did twice. So Sam, I almost had to go then, but he ended up pleading guilty to a lesser charge. And it was, I think it was Sally. I went through the whole thing, and, but we didn't have to go to court. The guy finally said, yeah, guilty. So, but yeah, it's like getting a DUI. Like, there's some DUI lawyers out there that are really good, and they can like pick you apart, and you might have been driving really, really drunk, but they can get you off. And it's hard because there's just so much that goes along with protecting with dogs. I mean, you have to have some kind of corroborating evidence. You can't just be like, yeah, the dog said no. I mean, if you can get the jury to believe that, great, you know, but it's just not a good idea. So.
Thank you so much.